Welcome to Truth Report, the show that digs where others won't. I'm Alex Truth, and we've got two stories today that, on the surface, couldn't look more different. A construction worker dead on a sidewalk in Mongkok. Millions of acres of pristine Alaskan wilderness thrown open to mining companies. But stay with us, because by the end of this broadcast, you're going to see a thread connecting both.
I'm Maya Clarity, and Alex is right. Today's stories are about what happens when the people in power treat human lives and natural landscapes as expendable resources. One story is about a single man, 60 years old, who went to work on bamboo scaffolding in Hong Kong and never came home. The other is about a government handing over 2 million acres of protected public land to extractive industries. Both are about who gets sacrificed and who profits.
We're going to take you deep into the facts, cite our sources, and ask the questions that the press releases don't want you asking. If you're new here, this is what we do. We follow the money, we follow the bodies, and we follow the paper trail. Truth Report doesn't do surface-level coverage.
And we want to be clear up front. We verified every claim in today's broadcast against primary source reporting. We're drawing from the South China Morning Post's on-the-ground coverage in Hong Kong, from CleanTechnica's reporting on the Interior Department announcement, from the Sierra Club's official statement, and from public records on workplace safety and federal land management. We do the homework so you don't have to take our word for it.
So buckle in. Let's start in Hong Kong, on a street corner in one of the most densely packed neighborhoods on Earth, where a man fell to his death and the questions are just beginning.
Our first story comes out of Mongkok, Hong Kong, one of the most densely populated districts in the world. According to the South China Morning Post, on Saturday afternoon, a 60-year-old man was found unconscious on a platform at 3 Nelson Street after falling from bamboo scaffolding on the outside of a building. He was rushed to Kwang Hospital in Yau Ma Tei, where he was pronounced dead.
Let's slow down on the details here because they matter. The South China Morning Post reports that Hong Kong police said the man was found at 2:38 in the afternoon. That's the middle of a workday. This wasn't some after-hours accident. This man was on the job. And now detectives from the Mongkok District Criminal Investigation Team have taken over the case. That's significant, Maya. This isn't being treated as a routine workplace accident. A criminal investigation unit is looking into the circumstances of this fall.
That's exactly right, and that distinction is critical. When a criminal investigation team takes over, it means police aren't satisfied that this was simply an accident. They're looking into whether negligence, safety violations, or even foul play may have contributed to this man's death. The fact that the South China Morning Post specifically notes the criminal investigation angle tells us there are open questions about what happened on that scaffolding.
Now, for our viewers who may not be familiar, bamboo scaffolding is still widely used in Hong Kong's construction industry. It's a traditional method that's been employed for decades, and skilled bamboo scaffolders are considered craftsmen. But here's what we need to talk about. Bamboo scaffolding, while it has a long history, operates in a regulatory environment that has been criticized for years by labor advocates. Falls from height remain one of the leading causes of workplace death in Hong Kong's construction sector.
And the data backs that up. Hong Kong's Labor Department has documented falls from height as consistently the #1 killer in construction. We're talking about an industry where workers, many of them older, many of them earning modest wages, are sent up the sides of buildings on structures that, however traditional, demand strict safety protocols. Harnesses, safety nets, proper tie-off points. The question in every single one of these deaths is the same. Were the protocols followed? Was the equipment provided? Was there adequate supervision?
And here's where it gets systemic. This 60-year-old man, whose name has not yet been released publicly, represents a demographic pattern that labor researchers have flagged for years. Older construction workers in Hong Kong face disproportionate risk. They're often working past typical retirement age because pension protections are insufficient. They may have chronic health conditions that increase the danger of physical labor at height. And they are frequently employed by subcontractors, sometimes several layers removed from the principal contractor, which creates a chain of diffused responsibility.
That subcontracting chain is where accountability goes to die, Alex. When a worker falls from scaffolding, the question of who is legally responsible becomes a maze. Is it the property owner who commissioned the work? The principal contractor? The subcontractor who hired the crew? The scaffolding company that erected the structure? Each entity points at the next, and in the meantime, a family is burying someone they love.
The South China Morning Post reports that detectives are investigating the circumstances behind the fall. That's deliberately vague language, and I think our viewers should understand why. In an active criminal investigation, police are careful about what they disclose. But the fact that this has been elevated beyond a standard workplace incident report tells us that something about the scene, the evidence, or the testimony raised red flags.
We should also note the location. Nelson Street in Mongkok is a commercial area with older buildings. Hong Kong has an aging building stock, and maintenance and renovation work on these structures is constant. That means scaffolding goes up and comes down all the time, and every single one of those operations is a potential point of failure if safety standards aren't rigorously enforced.
And let's talk about enforcement. Hong Kong's Occupational Safety and Health Ordinance places duties on employers to ensure safe working conditions. The Factories and Industrial Undertakings Ordinance specifically covers construction sites. But labor advocates have argued for years that penalties for violations are too low to serve as effective deterrents. A fine that represents a rounding error on a construction budget doesn't change behavior. A company can calculate that it's cheaper to risk a violation than to invest in proper safety.
That's the cost-benefit analysis that kills people. When the expected penalty for a safety violation is less than the cost of compliance, the rational economic decision, the cold, calculated decision, is to cut corners. And the person who pays the price is the worker standing on that scaffolding. Not the executive in the office. Not the contractor who underbid the job to win it. The worker.
We'll be following this case as the criminal investigation develops. If it turns out that safety protocols were violated, we want to know who made that decision and who profited from it. A 60-year-old man is dead, and someone needs to answer for why he was in a position where a fall could kill him. That's not an act of God. That's a failure of systems that are supposed to protect human life.
And to the family of this man, we want to say directly, we see this story. We will not let it become a one-day headline that disappears. This matters. His life mattered. Now let's turn to our second story, and it's a big one.
Our second story takes us from the streets of Hong Kong to the vast wilderness of Alaska, where the Trump administration has just made a move that environmental groups are calling an unprecedented giveaway to the mining and drilling industry. According to reporting from CleanTechnica, the Department of the Interior announced that it would revoke 2 public land orders, opening more than 2 million acres of protected public lands in Alaska to drilling and mining.
Let's be precise about what happened here, because the timing tells you everything you need to know about how this administration operates. This announcement came late on a Friday afternoon. If you've covered government for any length of time, you know what a Friday afternoon news dump means. It means they know the public won't like it. It means they're trying to bury it under the weekend news cycle. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum issued the order rescinding 2 land withdrawals, and they did it when they thought nobody would be paying attention.
The Sierra Club responded immediately, and their statement pulls no punches. We're going to break down exactly what's at stake here, because 2 million acres is an almost incomprehensible scale. To put it in perspective, that's larger than the state of Delaware. That's an area of protected public land, land that belongs to every American citizen, that was set aside for a reason, and that reason was to protect it from exactly this kind of exploitation.
And let's talk about what these land withdrawals were protecting. These aren't abstract policy designations on a map. These are ecosystems. We're talking about Arctic and subarctic landscapes that support caribou herds, migratory bird populations, salmon runs, and indigenous communities that have lived on and depended on these lands for thousands of years. The land withdrawals existed because previous administrations, both Republican and Democratic, recognized that some places are too valuable, too irreplaceable, to hand over to extractive industries.
The Sierra Club's statement frames this as part of a broader pattern, and they're right to do so. This isn't an isolated action. Since taking office, the Trump administration has systematically rolled back environmental protections, opened previously protected areas to development, and stacked regulatory agencies with industry insiders. This Alaska decision is the latest and one of the largest in a series of moves designed to transfer public wealth, our shared natural heritage, into private hands.
And when we say private hands, let's be specific about who benefits. Mining companies. Oil and gas corporations. These are industries that have spent millions on lobbying and campaign contributions. The return on that investment is staggering. For every dollar spent on political influence, they stand to gain access to resources worth billions. That's the transaction happening here, and the American public is on the losing end of it.
Let's talk about the legal mechanism, because it matters. Public land withdrawals are executive actions that set aside federal land for specific purposes, often conservation, and restrict certain types of development. They've been used by presidents of both parties going back over a century. When Secretary Burgum rescinds these withdrawals, he's arguing that the executive branch has the authority to undo protections that previous administrations put in place. Legal experts are divided on whether this kind of wholesale revocation will survive court challenges, but in the meantime, the damage can begin.
And that's the strategy, Alex. Move fast, open the land, let the permits start flowing, and by the time the lawsuits wind through the courts, there are already rigs on the ground and mines being dug. It's a fait accompli approach to deregulation. Create facts on the ground that are difficult to reverse even if the courts eventually rule against you. We've seen this playbook before with oil and gas leasing in other protected areas.
The environmental consequences are severe and potentially irreversible. Mining in Arctic and subarctic environments is particularly destructive because these ecosystems are fragile and slow to recover. Permafrost disruption, water contamination from mine tailings, habitat fragmentation from roads and infrastructure. Once you industrialize these landscapes, they don't bounce back in our lifetimes. We're talking about damage that persists for generations.
And we can't discuss this without talking about the indigenous communities affected. Alaska Native communities have subsistence rights and cultural connections to these lands that predate the United States by millennia. Opening these areas to mining and drilling threatens their food sources, their water, and their way of life. The Sierra Club's statement highlights this dimension, and it's one that the Interior Department's Friday afternoon announcement conveniently glossed over.
Let's also examine the economic argument that the administration uses to justify this. They claim it's about jobs and energy independence. But the economic research consistently shows that extractive industries on public lands provide a fraction of the economic value that conservation, recreation, and tourism generate. Alaska's tourism industry alone brings in billions, and it depends on the very landscapes that this order threatens to destroy.
The jobs argument is also misleading. Mining and drilling operations are increasingly mechanized. They don't employ the numbers they once did. And the jobs they do create are temporary, lasting only as long as the resource holds out. When the mine closes or the well runs dry, the company moves on, the workers are laid off, and the community is left with a degraded landscape and a bust economy. We've seen this pattern play out in resource-dependent communities across the country.
There's another dimension here that I think deserves attention. The timing of this announcement, February 2026, comes as global commodity markets are volatile and mining companies are looking for new sources of critical minerals. There's been a legitimate policy conversation about domestic mineral supply chains, particularly for materials used in batteries and electronics. But using that conversation as cover to open protected wilderness to all forms of mining and drilling is a bait-and-switch. It's wrapping a giveaway to fossil fuel companies in the language of green energy supply chains.
That's a critical point. The administration wants to conflate two very different things. Yes, the United States needs a strategy for critical mineral supply chains. No, that does not require sacrificing 2 million acres of protected Alaskan wilderness. There are already existing mining operations, recycling technologies, and diplomatic partnerships that can address supply chain concerns without turning national treasures into sacrifice zones. The fact that they bundle everything together is deliberate obfuscation.
And let's not forget the climate implications. At a moment when the scientific consensus is clearer than ever that we need to keep fossil fuels in the ground, this administration is opening new frontiers for extraction. Every barrel of oil pulled from newly opened Alaskan lands is a barrel that pushes us further past the carbon budgets that scientists say we need to respect to avoid catastrophic warming. This isn't just an environmental issue. It's a civilizational one.
The Sierra Club called this a massive giveaway of America's public lands. They pointed out that these protections were put in place for good reason and that revoking them serves only the interests of extractive industries at the expense of the public. Their statement emphasizes that the lands belong to all Americans, not to mining companies, and that this administration has no mandate to hand them over.
Now let's pull back and look at the pattern, because this is where Truth Report earns its name. We've covered two stories today. A construction worker dead in Hong Kong. 2 million acres of protected land open to mining in Alaska. What connects them?
The connection is a system of values that treats human beings and natural landscapes as resources to be exploited. In Hong Kong, a 60-year-old man was on scaffolding because the economics of construction prioritize cost-cutting over worker safety. In Alaska, 2 million acres of wilderness are being opened because the economics of political influence prioritize corporate profits over public good. In both cases, the people who bear the costs are not the people who make the decisions.
That's the fundamental pattern. Externalized costs. In economics, an externalized cost is a cost that's imposed on someone who didn't choose to bear it. When a construction company skips safety measures, the cost of that decision is externalized onto the worker who falls. When a government opens protected land to mining, the environmental cost is externalized onto indigenous communities, onto future generations, onto every living thing that depends on those ecosystems.
And in both cases, the decision-makers are insulated from the consequences. The contractor who cuts corners doesn't stand on the scaffolding. Interior Secretary Burgum doesn't drink the water downstream from the mine. The executives of the mining companies that will bid on these leases don't live in the villages that will lose their salmon runs. There's a fundamental disconnect between who decides and who suffers.
This is what we mean when we talk about power structures. It's not a conspiracy. It's something more mundane and in some ways more dangerous. It's a system where the incentives are aligned to produce exactly these outcomes. Companies are incentivized to minimize costs. Politicians are incentivized to reward donors. Regulatory agencies are captured by the industries they're supposed to oversee. And at the bottom of it all, ordinary people pay with their health, their land, their lives.
And the information architecture makes it worse. A worker dies in Mongko and it's a single paragraph in the local crime blotter. 2 million acres get open to mining and it's buried in a Friday afternoon news dump. The system doesn't just produce harm. It produces obscurity. It's designed to make these stories hard to see, hard to connect, hard to sustain public outrage about. That's why shows like this one exist.
We want to make one more connection that our viewers should think about. Both of these stories involve the failure of protective systems. In Hong Kong, occupational safety regulations exist. They're on the books. The question is whether they were enforced and whether the penalties for violation are sufficient to change behavior. In Alaska, land protections existed. They were established through proper legal processes. And they were revoked by executive order because a new administration decided that corporate access was more important than conservation.
In both cases, the protections failed not because they didn't exist, but because the political and economic forces arrayed against them were stronger. And that tells us something important about the nature of protective regulation in our current moment. A rule is only as strong as the will to enforce it. A protection is only as durable as the political consensus behind it. When enforcement is underfunded and when political consensus is undermined by industry money, protections become paper shields.
So what do we do? This is where Truth Report gets practical. First, pay attention. The Friday afternoon news dump works because people aren't watching. Be watching. Second, demand accountability. In Hong Kong, the criminal investigation into this man's death needs to be followed to its conclusion, and if safety violations are found, the penalties need to be severe enough to matter. In Alaska, legal challenges to the land order revocations need public support and funding.
Third, follow the money. Every time a protection is rolled back, ask who benefits financially. Every time a safety regulation is weakened, ask who saves money. The answers will lead you to the people and institutions that are driving these decisions. Fourth, support the organizations doing the work. The Sierra Club, labor unions, legal aid organizations, investigative journalism outlets. These are the institutions that stand between corporate power and public interest, and they need resources.
And fifth, remember names. Remember the name of the Interior Secretary who signed this order. Remember the names of the mining companies that bid on these leases. Remember the names of the contractors and subcontractors involved in construction deaths. Accountability requires memory, and in a world designed to make us forget yesterday's outrage, remembering is an act of resistance.
We also want to speak directly to the workers and communities affected by these stories. To construction workers in Hong Kong and everywhere else who go to work every day wondering if today is the day the scaffolding gives way, your lives are not expendable inputs in someone else's profit calculation. You deserve safe working conditions, and when your employers fail to provide them, that is not your fault. It is their crime.
And to the indigenous communities in Alaska, to the subsistence hunters and fishermen, to the elders who carry the knowledge of these lands, we hear you. Your opposition to this giveaway is not obstructionism. It is the defense of your home, your culture, and your future. The lands that this administration is handing to mining companies are not empty. They are full of life, full of history, and full of meaning that no balance sheet can capture.
This brings us to the heart of what Truth Report is about. We believe that journalism is not neutral observation. It is the act of bearing witness and demanding accountability. When a man falls from scaffolding and dies, we bear witness. When a government hands protected wilderness to corporations, we bear witness. And we demand that the people responsible answer for their decisions.
That's what we do here, every episode. We take the stories that the powerful want buried and we drag them into the light. We connect the dots that the news cycle wants to keep separate. And we ask the questions that make the comfortable uncomfortable. A dead worker in Hong Kong and a land grab in Alaska are the same story, told in different languages, on different continents.
The story is this. When profit is the only value, everything else becomes a cost to be minimized. Human safety becomes a cost. Environmental protection becomes a cost. Indigenous rights become a cost. Democratic accountability becomes a cost. And costs get cut. That's the logic of the system, and until we change the system, we will keep telling these stories, because they will keep happening.
Before we go, I want to remind our viewers of something. These are not distant abstractions. Every one of us lives downstream from decisions like these. The deregulation happening in Alaska will affect global carbon emissions, which affect everyone on the planet. The workplace safety failures happening in Hong Kong are replicated in construction sites in every country. These are our stories, all of us.
If today's broadcast moved you, do something with that feeling. Share these stories. Contact your representatives about the Alaska land orders. Support organizations fighting for worker safety and environmental protection. Subscribe to independent journalism that does this kind of in-depth reporting. The antidote to powerlessness is action, even small action.
From Truth Report, I'm Alex Truth. We dig where others won't. We say what others won't. And we're not going anywhere.
I'm Maya Clarity. Stay informed. Stay outraged. And stay with us. Until next time, keep asking questions and keep demanding answers. The truth doesn't report itself.
Truth Report. Out.